been updated to the new operating system. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little more on what is urban economics. So we got consumers maximizing utility, and we've got businesses trying to maximize profits. And so urban economics is kind of a unique intersection of those things. Both with households in their location as well as businesses. So in different topics, we'll think about where the household locates, because they've got one spouse working in the city and one spouse working over here. So where is the optimal place to locate given their preferences? As well as then businesses thinking about, is it better to be close to the inputs, or is it better to be close to the output where it's going to be sold, right? So we got those sorts of decisions going on for them. So I got my remote control working today. Got the same problem with the other one. This one doesn't even have the good spec.
Maybe it's just telling you should go back to the old days completely.
The old days of clicking completely on that.
No, whiteboard and stuff.
Oh,
or
whiteboard.
You've got a chalkboard over there.
Yeah, I can go chalk. I did do chalk before. So we're going to run through all these parts of the book that we kind of briefly did last time. So here are the questions in part 1. And John, number between 2 and 5. 3. 1, 2, 3. Chelsea, what do you think? What question interests you the most out of these? Who benefits from urban growth? Okay, so why?
Oh, why? I think it's interesting to look at, like in any situation with growth and stuff, like who benefits, and then maybe who benefits, who faces the opposite side of that, and is hurt by it, and then also like the why and why certain people do benefit.
Yeah. So you like the distributional issues, right? Who's going to get, so we have growth, who's going to end up getting it, and then ultimately that leads to questions of redistribution. Should we figure out how to redo it? All right, so lots of interesting questions in that part 1. Part 2, give those a read. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Michael, which one do you think is the most interesting there?
What are the effects of land use controls and zoning?
Okay, and why?
I just think it's interesting because obviously once you zone land, people either pay to change it or you're kind of restricted to possibly use non-ideal locations.
Okay.
So what can they do with those non-ideal locations?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's interesting when we're limiting choice, right? So in general, more choices means you're better off, is our conceptual thing in economics, right? If you have more opportunities, if your consumption possibilities or production possibilities frontier is bigger, then you're made better off. And when we get into these land use effects that you can only do this type of activity in this particular area, we're adding constraints. And so the question, there can be a lot of other elements that enter into the equation that aren't able to be addressed because of what some city planner thought would be a good place to do something or an activity to restrict. Okay. At the same time, there can be, not to be all negative, positive things that go on is what we're going to learn about by having things concentrated in a particular area. There can be benefits to everyone involved as well. So that certainly can go both ways, which makes it an interesting question. Colby, what do you think about these three?
Probably why do so few people take mass transit?
Okay, why is that interesting?
Because I don't really hear of people using like railways or stuff like that back home around here. So.
Okay, so you're thinking more of maybe for delivering goods and stuff, or consumers getting around? Because a lot, it can be in that context, but a lot of times it's in buses, trains, and stuff to move people around.
That too. I mean, I don't really see that many buses and stuff back.
Okay. Yeah, what causes the need for mass transit? What do we need? Why aren't you seeing it back home?
Because it's not, I mean, really it's not, well, at least in Kansas City, it's not used as much because there's no need for it because, I mean, the roadways are pretty efficient as far as the spreading.
Right. So comes down to that economic decision again. The thing that's a little unique to that, I think I brought up the Austin example, is that at any given point in time, it may not seem worth it to put it. So you really have to be kind of long-range planning, and the transportation log people, study this all the time on when are we going to get there, because you do have to kind of bite the bullet eventually if you want to grow. Does everybody want to grow? No. So then you go through that whole battle. So it's a big decision when municipalities choose to go down that route because it's usually expensive. You usually see buses evolve first because they're easier, little incremental chunks, right? So if you buy a bus, what does that run? I don't know, $400,000. Pick out a number. I don't know what they really run, but let's say $400,000. You get to take it in $400,000 chunks. We'll start off with this route and this route, and you can kind of take baby steps into the mass transit. Whereas you go with the rail system, and you're committing to laying down all the rail, and there's a lot more upfront costs, even though the operating costs might be more efficient over time. Okay, part 4. On to Kate.
I think what is the optimum level of crime is pretty interesting.
That is an interesting one, isn't it?
Because you'd think in an ideal society there would be no crime, but apparently
Yeah.
we need some.
Do we need some? That's an interesting one. What do you think's meant there? What? That is an interesting one. An optimal level of crime.
I think it goes back to, and this is going into entrepreneurial stuff, I guess, but looking at how government shape and political organizations that are, going against the government if they gain power by gaining bodies, they might start committing crimes, not necessarily violent crimes, but just crimes against that current law.
Yeah. How do you reduce crime? I mean, what are some things that can be done? We learned in Freakonomics that abortion led to reduced crime 18 years later, which was interesting. But what's our normal ways we reduce crime?
Changing the law.
Okay, changing laws, making everything legal.
Well,
we can reduce
It's
crime that
impossible.
way.
Wouldn't
That
that
is
be-
it's
wouldn't
an
that be
interesting
the easiest
possibility,
way?
right? Yeah,
Wouldn't that be the
everything's.
easiest way?
That would probably be the quickest and easiest way to reduce crime like that. Okay, but what else? What's the other direction instead of loosening? Tightening, right? And so we need, instead of 10 cops out there, we need 15. And we could reduce crime even more if we put 20. We could reduce crime even more if we put 30. We could reduce crime even more if we allowed people to be frisked by the 20 cops that we ramped up everywhere you walk. We could reduce crime even more if we continued to pour on more and more and more things. But we start to not be the same society pretty quickly. That's this whole NSA stuff that's going on. How much should the government get to protect us? And how much should we have the liberty to do on our own? So I think for some people's preferences, again, getting back to the utility function, we'd say, hey, I'll live with a certain amount of crime because I don't want you checking me every time I'm doing something, right? I don't want to have that much interrogation going on in my life daily. So I don't want to be that imposed upon. So the freedom and reduction of crime are kind of going in different directions. And so we think about the marginal cost of an additional making things safer if we go the direction of less crime, and the marginal benefits, and weigh those out. John, a comment?
I was going to make some comment about TSA and ask really how effective the increased regulation actually was, but then I decided that
Okay.
it wasn't really worth the time. So.
Well, I mean, that does get into the measurement of it, and so it's been pretty sketchy on the benefits of each additional thing, and very hard to measure if we're now, this last trip we took, this was true at one airport but not the other, but kids of a certain age don't have to take off their shoes. So how much more harm am I at now that we changed the rule that the kids don't have to take off their shoes, right? So all these little things like, well, if the adults have to take off their shoes, if you were a criminal, aren't you just going to have the kids wear whatever devices they can get through? I mean, it just kind of gets silly to a point. So,
I have a
yeah.
comment. With like the optimum level of crime, remember like I remember the example you used was like you have one grill, and like after a while you just have too many workers to where an additional worker is pointless.
Yeah.
Like I feel like you could use that in the same way as like you having too many police workers, where hiring another one would just kind of be too much in one area. So you kind of have to find that level where, and it has to do with cost too. Like,
And you're holding, in that case, maybe the population fixed, right? So the population stays fixed. How many more police officers? Obviously, if the population's growing, then the amount of police coverage needs to grow proportionately too, perhaps, depending on what that function looks like of population. And we'll study some of that, where economists estimate what that relationship is. Okay. Housing and public policy. Cadence.
How do changes in one housing submarket affect other submarkets?
Okay. So the interaction of markets. Yeah. And I think you get into interesting issues of the poor and the rich and how those markets interact. Do we allow a Walmart in our backyard or not, or a bowling alley? There's been cases of that in Kansas City that I've heard. I think it was the Walmart one, where the kind of the rich area, I can't remember, it was Leewood or Shawnee or something like that. Anyway, there was a Walmart that was going to go up next to the subdivision that had, $500,000 houses plus in there, and so there was kind of a big eyesore, and that what they were mostly concerned about was that Walmart attracts lower income people. Potentially lower income means more crime, more criminals to the area. They see their house, they end up getting harmed by it. So those sorts of interactions. Let's go to Adam.
Does majority rule generate efficient choices?
Ah, that is an awesome one. Yes. So that gets into the public choice theory stuff. Very interesting. That's such a complex issue. Well, it's not very complex. It's the majority does not often get the most efficient solution. So because of rational ignorance, people not knowing the issues when they're voting anyway. So do we really get the most efficient solution each time? And when you think about two groups compromising, like here, it sounds like the budget's going to be settled at the federal level till September is what it's leaning towards. It sounds like they realized what a mess they made last time. And so you've got the conservatives at one end of the spectrum and the liberals at the other end of the spectrum, and they fought. They kind of came to an impasse. We had the shutdown, blah, blah, blah. And now we're finding some sort of compromise. And so the question is that compromise really the most efficient solution? If one person, if the minority, let's say, has the right solution, as far as we can tell, but is unable to convey that message to the masses because of a lack of communication and a lack of ability to deliver the information that could be digested in an appropriate way, then the compromise may not be any better than whatever the status quo was. So it's interesting, whenever we come into compromises, people feel good about that, but maybe they shouldn't. In some cases, compromise is good. I'm not trying to be anti-compromise. I mean, if we can be at loggerheads, and maybe it's better to meet in the middle somewhere. But oftentimes, meeting in the middle might not be a sufficient place to be, even if it makes us feel good. Oh, you gave a little, I gave a little, and we're all happy now. No, it might be the wrong solution for what is needed in the economy. All right, any other comments, questions on that one? All right, so let's get down to some basics here. What the heck's a city? So the government has defined what a city is. So what you think is a city is probably a city, but we start making definitions. And part of the reason we do these definitions is so that we can carry out some research. And so we kind of have things, if we want to compare California to Kansas, that we at least know what the sizes are. So this is good to give some sort of standardization to that. So urban area, you need a minimum population of, take a guess, to be an urban area. Let me hear some guesses. 2,500. So you did your reading already. Okay. 2,500. 25,000. 2,500. All right. So people living in urban areas, metropolitan area. If you, what would you need for metropolitan area? 100,000. How many people are in KC? How many? What's the population of the KC metropolitan area, which would include multiple cities usually? And
it's not over 1.8, like, or 1 million, is it?
I don't know what it is. I'm actually on it. You guys are the ones from, or some of you are anyway, from Kansas City.
It really is up there.
I thought it was even in the.
Olathe and Oakland Park are close to. Gotta be 800,000.
Yeah, just by themselves, and then going across into Missouri, and if you start taking the whole place. So 50,000 people is what we're going to call a metropolitan area. And then for the smaller cities, kind of in the middle ranges, they've labeled this micropolitan. And then within these areas, there's always a city that's the big one. There, by definition, has to be. And we're just going to call that the principal city. So whatever one is the largest in that MSA, statistical area, that is called the principal city.
Is that like, are those like the cities that show up on the weather maps?
Typically, probably, yeah. I don't know if there necessarily would be, because even Ottawa shows up on the weather map once in a while. Although we are in our area, probably we're the big one.
Could you hold up?
What's
I
that?
was asking if you'd hold up.
Oh,
Are you sending these out?
yeah. Yeah, you will be getting these ultimately too. So. But these are good definitions to have. So yeah, if you want to jot them down in your notes, just as maybe we're going through lecture later or something, you might reference back to that. So one thing I might share with you on the 50,000 mark is that the federal government allows for more improvements to your infrastructure that they share the cost in if you become a metropolitan area. So in Ames, where Iowa State is, it was a big deal when we got up to that 50,000 mark because they did a census thing and they were trying to, like the city council and the local people are like, okay, we got to get those students to get counted. Iowa State's about 30,000 population. So you take out the students and we're down to something in the 20, 30, probably 30 range. And so they purposely made it so that school was in session and took extra efforts to go to the dormitories and stuff to make sure that the head count was good so that they could hit 50 because it was right on the border. And if they made it to that status, then it opened it up for additional federal funds of infrastructure and things. So that was kind of a big deal.
What is it called if like it's under 300? There's like a ton of like teeny tiny.
Township?
We start to get to rural. Yep. Okay. So, how do cities form? If we start to think about an area, we imagine the United States. Bye, guys.
Sorry.
I'll try to get it posted for you here too. So,
Thank you.
if we think about a rural area of the United States, a couple hundred plus years ago, what would be needed for a city to develop? So agricultural surplus is one of those conditions. What do you think that would be?
Enough food produced by individual farmers that not everyone has to farm.
Right,
People can specialize.
right, that you don't have to work, so that there's extra, right? So that's kind of one of the first things you got to think about is if people live in cities, they can't grow their own food to be sufficient on their own. If you're living in the concrete jungle, you're not going to be able to make enough food to be on your own. So that's kind of an interesting abstract thing that we don't think about every day, is this agricultural surplus. First we feed ourselves, then if there's extras we can go to the market and sell it. Likewise, the city dwellers have to have something to give up as well. They have to have something valuable for the farmers to trade their food. And so urban production needs to be of something of value such that the farmers want to give up their food. And then lastly, transportation to make the trades happen. There's got to be some way to get from Kansas to Manhattan to make the deal work. If it costs $1 zillion to move food from Kansas to Manhattan, the deal's off, right? If the transportation costs are too much, then it's just not going to happen. So this is where we kind of have a divergence into some new territory as well when we start thinking about transportation costs, which then ultimately leads to location choices. So here's the data from 1800 up to 2010. Percent of the population in urban areas. So 80% of us live in urban areas. 80% of us can't make enough food, for the most part, to live on our own. Which again, we don't even think of ever going back to that, but that's the idea. 20% of the population feeds us. In the big picture on our island, 20% of the population supplies all of the food for us. And we can get into international trade, and you know, some of the world is providing that as well now.
I mean, can you really say 20%? Because you're going to have a lot of people living in rural areas that don't provide.
True. So it's even less, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably would be less. That's right. Yep, because they're rural areas in a small township or something. Yeah.
I know about the country, but we don't farm. Like, we
Yep.
used to do a little bit.
Chelsea's like, we do oil.
But and you're absolutely correct. But that portion is relatively small to that overall picture. But yeah, good comment. So, largest metropolitan areas in the United States in 2005. So how many do you think there are? In the United States,
30.
metropolitan areas, what's a metropolitan area? Over 50,000, we just defined it earlier. So, I hear 30.
City's second to last.
Second to last. There they are.
Oh wait.
So Kansas City is down
Oh, that's
here.
the old one.
This is 2005 data.
Yeah.
And so we got Kansas City, Mo, and Kansas, notice, so it's the whole metropolitan area at 2 million. And the percentage change was pretty strong relative to a lot of counterparts here at 13%.
The 6.1.
Yeah, 6 point.
Oh, am I on the wrong line? Oh yeah, you're right.
The book actually has
Yep, sorry,
a
I
more up-to-date
was looking
one
at the
too.
13. What's that?
The book has a more up-to-date one.
Oh, is that what's that one at?
2009, and it's actually got Kansas as being 29.
Oh, so it's second. Oh, that's where
So
you're
it's
getting the
dropped
second to
down,
last.
But it's gained since 2005.
Okay.
It's gained like 100,000.
Yeah, they're all gaining, you know, increasing, and some can shrink. Here's what do you think's causing the problem here?
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh. What's causing the problem there?
It's pollution.
Oh,
Industry
Pittsburgh.
failure.
And a national football team is called the Pittsburgh
Steelers.
Steelers.
Steel market.
Yeah, steel industry in decline.
So what's caused?
So they haven't. Now Pittsburgh actually is a bit of a good example of some changes. So steel industry was in decline. You know, foreign competition. They asked for protection. They didn't innovate. I mean, it was kind of one of those type of stories. But they have done some innovative things to keep this from falling into a Detroit level type thing. So that's actually been pretty good. Now with this data,
Detroit's up.
where is Detroit? Detroit's up here, but what does your book say there on Detroit?
Detroit is 11th.
Yeah, but what's the numbers?
2000 to 2009, the percentage change was negative 1.1%.
Okay, so it went negative. So what's the population in 2009?
4.4 million.
4.4, and it's 4.488 here, so been pretty stagnant.
What all exchange because I think Las Vegas has the highest growth population on that chart, it has a 24.3% change
Mhm.
in 5 years. So like what all would be cause that so huge of a growth in Las Vegas?
What do you think,
I mean, I
Vegas?
don't think I'm older.
You guys aren't
I mean,
old
I-
enough to know, but on some of this, but so this was from 2000. So what Vegas looked like in 2000 versus 2005. What does Vegas have?
I mean, they have all
Vegas
those
now
same
has
streets.
1.9 million.
He says
They're at 1.9 now. So they were at 1.7. They're at 1.9. John?
Vegas at the time kind of had like a real estate boom going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've been growing, but and why?
Is it just because of all the casinos?
Probably.
The casino, yeah, it's pretty much all tourist driven. So, the conference that I'm going to in April is at the Wynn, which I've never stayed at. That place looks pretty sweet
Whoa.
online. So I've never stepped foot in that, but I've kind of always wanted to. So that whole strip has just changed completely since 2000. I went there a handful of times, and it's changed a lot just in the last 20 years. So.
So Dallas, what's caused Dallas? Because there it's at 5.8.
Yeah, Dallas has been strong. I don't know. I don't know what.
6.5 almost.
Yeah, I don't have a story other than Jerry Jones and building the $1 billion arena. I'm not exactly sure. I do know this. I guess the one thing that I heard was
That and-
Dallas was just the opposite of Austin. They invested in the infrastructure with the rail system and mass transit, and so that's part of what's allowed them to prosper.
'cause, yeah.
But other than that, I'm not sure. All right, so this one looks at urbanization rates around the world. So we got Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America. The first one's the whole world. And the number of people relocating to cities and urban areas has grown everywhere. So it's a pretty important topic to be studying on people's migration to urban areas over time. And what's kind of interesting here is, do you reach a point where you're maxed out? You know, so you see the industrialized area here is Europe, well, Latin America, Caribbean. I mean, that's kind of a mixed bag. But we've got a few of them here in this 80s range.
Until you have more
Yeah,
Tax rate.
yeah, good point. So as more machines replace people in that industry, then we can expect to continue to see that trend. So world's largest cities. So we expand this and going outside of the United States. Tokyo.
Which is nice. It's just
So who's tapped out on this
it's
list?
like New York, Times Square, all day, every day.
What's that, Tokyo? Yeah. Have you been there?
I haven't, but I know some people, and they're like, if you've been to New York and you've been to Times Square, it's like Times Square all
Yeah.
day, every day.
Well, and just the numbers are substantially higher. So who's tapped out on this? Look at the data here. What variable would make you start to think maybe somebody's tapped out?
Percent change.
Yeah.
So
So Tokyo,
Paris.
1% change over, that's not a small period of time, that's 10 years, right? And we got Japan again down here. And so you got this little island that's built itself vertically, and they are just busting at the seams is kind of the picture that you get with Japan. And then what else we have here? Paris, France, our socialist friends. Maybe there's other reasons behind this one, I'm not sure. But this is Paris area, so again, it's been around for a while, one of those cities that's been around, so they might be closer to being tapped out. We got Russia, that kind of hits our small growth people. And then we've got Bangladesh. Is that our leader? Nope. Here we go. Nigeria. I'm not sure what's going on there. So interesting ways to kind of look at the data and think about how and where growth is going to occur. So metropolitan areas with at least 1 million people are these large agglomerations. So agglomeration is probably a kind of a new term for you, and one that's important in this class. It's the idea of people coming together and there being synergies of being together, which is kind of what a city's all about. So why is there greater growth in less developed regions? This one's kind of, to me, a little counterintuitive. So we've got more developed regions, less developed regions in 1950. And these are the number of cities with populations greater than 1 million. And then as we travel through time, we end up having it be a little lopsided on the number of cities with populations of 1 million being much higher in less developed regions as opposed to more developed regions, although the more developed regions continue to add cities, right? So as we go through more developed regions, 49, 83, 115, 129, so they're going up, but one's going up more.
Just a guess, I don't know the exact statistics on it from sociology, but I'm going to guess.
I don't either, so that makes 2 of us. That's what the discussion's all about.
I'm gonna I think that death rates and age expectancy is growing in some of the less developed regions. Like they're becoming slightly more and more developed, but birth rates are still relatively pretty high. So you're adding population significantly faster than you're getting rid of it.
That's an interesting comment, yeah.
More developed areas where the birth rates are relatively low, and so things just stay a little bit more stable.
Yeah, possibly. Chelsea?
Yeah, I heard that, and I was just thinking of like lower income competition, like looking for work in cities. Like that's where you're gonna go to cities looking for work, and so that's gonna cause those underdeveloped regions to grow more.
Okay. More quickly growing as you start to get more income. Did I see Katie?
Yeah, I was just, well, when I was thinking of like underdeveloped, I wasn't thinking just in America, I was thinking like in Africa and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, lesser
So,
developed regions of the world.
When they're less developed, I feel like they have more kids to work. You
Okay,
know, like,
birth
to,
rate
like,
type stuff.
Yeah, to like help like around the house and stuff. So I feel like the birth rate would go up not only because of that, also because of like lack of birth control and stuff like
possibly, or just if you're in the business of home production, just like it was in the United States 200 plus years ago, you had a lot of kids because you wanted a lot of labor. We needed hands around the farm, right? So it might have been from that perspective. Maybe not necessarily birth control, although that could be a contributing factor, of course, too. Okay, now Michael?
As far as, I guess, less developed regions, it seems like kind of going with what the lecture, that little small lecture that you had the other day, whereas, coming to a city, even near a subway transit spot or anything like that, like it's poor in those areas, and so as people like come to form cities, the cities might actually become almost more chaotic in a sense than they were when they were smaller.
It might be a quicker coming together of people.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of envisioned lesser developed regions being more dispersed with, so if you take a slice in time, in the lesser developed regions, they're more dispersed with a bunch of people. And then as technology and other advantages continue to grow, there's more opportunity for those people to come together quicker. And so the formation of cities, and then these other things that you guys are mentioning is kind of what I visualized. But it wasn't the easiest thing to maybe nail, because this was kind of a surprising result that the number of large cities was that much
and I
bigger.
guess small opportunities in the more developed regions. So
Katie, what are you picking on? Okay. Figured it was a phone picker.
At least just on her nose.
Well, actually, I would prefer it to be the nose. There's no points lost for picking,
We all just bring like fake cats and pick your nose with them.
Okay. So there are 5 axioms that we kind of need to keep in play, or you'll see them come into play as we develop through all of these chapters. And so these are important to buy into, and why I spent some time on Tuesday going through the principles of economics. So these really are mostly concepts that we learned in principles class, but they're a little more specific to this urban growth. So prices adjust to achieve locational equilibrium. What's a locational equilibrium? No incentive to move. Okay, so rent on a beach house is greater than rent on a highway house. So if we look at the rental rates, one's on the beach, one's on the highway, the beach has more rent. It's more expensive. What other sorts of examples might you see for prices adjusting to compensate for location, which is kind of the heart of this class? Prices of something adjusting to location.
Like Alaska, they have to import a lot of foods.
Okay?
And so I know the food prices are higher, but then they don't get taxed, right?
Yeah, in fact, there's a negative tax there. They get paid to live there, which is kind of interesting about Alaska. I don't know if you guys knew that, but you actually get paid to live there. So they have a negative tax. Now, I'm not sure that's squeezing it out enough, Kate, because there's transportation costs to get the food up to Alaska. So part of the reason oranges are more expensive there is because we have to ship them a greater distance.
Food in Hawaii
So-
is really expensive too.
What's that?
Like food in Hawaii is
Yeah.
a lot more expensive.
Yep. Yep, same thing. Anytime you're coming across on water, we've got that, which we're going to spend a lot of time on transportation costs too. So here,
Well, I was just thinking like cost of living in general. I mean, and I don't know what always causes cost of living, but there's definitely some things just like in California, so much higher.
right, right. So what else about, let's say California living. My brother-in-law is living in LA. He just moved there a couple months ago. He moved from Minnesota. He moved from Minneapolis area to LA. So he's doing a similar job which job had to pay more holding all of the things constant? So if we hold all things constant except for location between LA and Minneapolis, which one would have to pay more? Minneapolis. Right. So why? Now, cost of living might contribute to that in a different way. So he actually has to be paid more because insurance and other things are more expensive in LA. But if we try to hold that constant and think about the difference, what might be driving that? Weather, right. You're going to freeze your tail off up in Minnesota. Trust me, I've been there, lived there. And when it was, the polar vortex was sweeping through the nation, it was at my parents' house, negative 29 degrees on the thermostat. And my brother-in-law Luke was in 76 degrees down in LA. Right? So that's the type of equalizing factor that prices are going to adjust because you can't move the weather. If we could move the weather, by the way, they'd be the same. There would be no effect on that. Right? So if we equalize the weather, then that factor disappears. But we can't because we've got these locational differences. And prices are going to adjust to achieve locational equilibrium. So through people moving to LA, the supply and demand of people moving to one place or the other, those prices are going to adjust to reflect that. Okay, so wage in Coolsville, that would be LA, I guess. Wage in Dullsville, rent in the center versus the fringe. All examples of prices adjusting to location. Axiom 2, self-reinforcing effects generate extreme outcomes. Self-reinforcing effect, a change in something that leads to additional changes in the same direction. So we used to have this strip in Des Moines called the Miracle Mile, and all the car dealerships were lined up on the Miracle Mile, which may seem weird. Why do they do that? Well, when people shop for a car, they usually shop around. They just don't stop into one place. And so by having more together and reducing the cost of shopping around, basically, by having them close together and reducing the cost of shopping around, it benefits all of the car places because they're attracting more people who know that they get to shop around fairly costlessly. So instead of running to a different place far away, they know that they can find what they need going down the Miracle Mile. I know there's a place in Kansas City in that downtown area that seems to attract artists, right? You always have those pockets of areas that people like to be around other people. Birds of a feather flock together. They might even be more productive by sharing that energy. The Silicon Valley with high-tech stuff. All those things we call clusters. And it's something, do you guys remember Porter's 5 Forces? Or does that ring a bell? Michael Porter, he's kind of the famous business guy that came up with 5 competitive forces. And some people have countered that to say, hey, you forgot that sometimes there's things of cooperation. That's not on that list of 5. And so that's what we're talking about here, is that we might want to go together as a cooperative force rather than a competitive force. There might be some elements where it's better to share. So we can look for those situations where we might kind of balloon out and make each other better off with the things that we do in a particular area of location. Number 3, externalities cause inefficiency. Externalities cause inefficiency. Why?
Because they're not easy to account for in market transactions.
Yes, I'd agree that they're not easy to account for. But what do we hang our hat on that we say an externality is going to be bad? Externalities cause inefficiency because it's not allocatively efficient. What is allocatively efficient? When what happens? Marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. All right, so the social benefit and social cost that we did before is the efficient situation. And anytime we are not at this point, then we are at an inefficient point. So if the private benefit of an education is here, but society benefits from having more smart people run around rather than dumb people, the people who find that advantageous, the private benefits, are only going to consume education up to this level. But through the self-reinforcing effects and other the externalities that go on from having some smart people around rather than dumb people, we would like to have more. And so it's inefficient anytime we have an externality, whether it's an external benefit or an external cost, we have an inefficiency. Okay, so what are our examples of inefficiency that we should just kind of have off the top of our head? Education's one. What's the other one? Pollution. Just always have those off the top of your head, kind of, that if there's a cost. What's that?
Liquor licenses in Kansas right now.
What do you mean?
Was it you that was, I guess, like going through Kansas legislature right now, I was
Yeah.
talking with my dad about this. They're kind of passing a law or an act that would allow grocery stores to carry liquor as well.
Right, which they do in Iowa, by the way,
Yeah, and so
and Missouri.
yeah, and so Kansas has kind of put a halt on giving anybody liquor licenses because they're like,
Oh, there's a moratorium on it right
Yeah.
now, right? Which a moratorium just means that temporarily we're not doing anything until we figure this out later. Kind of
Yeah.
kick the can down the road. But let's freeze the status quo and then develop a policy later.
And
Okay.
Some are saying that the reason behind that is because, if Walmart can supply liquor in the end, then we don't want everybody to just kind of be pushed out of the business. Rather, Walmart has to buy, Blue Sky or Brandywine's liquor license or something like that in order to get into the
See, my
business.
argument with that, though, is that for college students and college-based campuses, as a college student in a smaller town, I don't want to go into Walmart and carry 3 bottles of liquor out so everybody can see me. Especially if you're wearing any sort of OU gear.
Isn't that guy the star of the basketball team? Isn't that?
Yeah, and the coach.
Yeah, John.
I was gonna say, I think that they allow liquor sales in Walmarts and grocery stores in Missouri. They say that because I'm pretty sure I saw it.
Oh, yeah.
When I was
I mean,
staying
they do.
there, and so there wasn't, as I say, there definitely was not any negative side effect. This also solved plenty of liquor stores.
So what's your gut feeling as young budding econ majors? By the way, did you guys all get the email? As long as I got a show of hands and I'm thinking about it, who can't come? Is there a conflict with that? You got practice? Oh, it depends on practice. Okay. And you got to work? Okay.
What time is it again?
So RSVP, because I do want to keep a head count, and my wife she's the chili master, so she's going to put it together, but I'd like to get kind of a head count, so try to RSVP back
How
for me
many
if you can.
economic majors are there?
I think there's around 9. So most of you guys here in this class, because this class is required. There are a couple, there's a couple underclassmen that have declared that aren't in here, so they're still going through some of the principles and
Yeah,
stuff.
that's
So
what I meant.
there's a few other ones. And there's some that I don't know, so I'm kind of trying to flush people out of the woodwork. So it might be more than that, but I just don't know for sure. So, okay, back to your booze thing. So as young budding econ majors, what do you think? Should we open it up? Is it in general good to allow more people to sell liquor?
Well,
Because I feel like that would make the crime rate go up and like there'd be a bunch of
For the
like
market,
negative
though.
things. It would be
Okay.
the consumer market.
So crime rate maybe goes up. I heard another no somewhere. No?
Just
I didn't
you're-
say anything.
Okay.
More people would
Well,
So
buy.
just on the crime rate. All right.
And, like DUI.
Yeah. So is there a connection there with DUIs?
No, not at all. I mean, not really. The reason why I say that is that you're opening up more places for people to buy and to consume at home as opposed to then having to go to a bar and then drive home.
I suspect there's zero effect. I mean, if you want to get your drink on, then you just go to Blue Sky. So it's completely a distributional question, right? I mean, they're trying to protect mom and pop, other small shops from competition. It's a standard protectionist type of thing that there's anti-sentiment to it at all. It's the same thing for free trade, whether we're talking televisions, whether we're talking GM and Chrysler and the Toyotas coming across. You guys, this is the same exact argument. It should be good rather than bad. In the overall net effect, there will be winners and losers. Are we against it because we want to support the people who will potentially lose or not? That's a distributional issue. Now, it sounds like, I didn't hear this, what you guys are saying about buying a license or something. Maybe they're trying to come up with a redistribution mechanism so that the losers get compensated.
Yeah, so it's
Now, that's a
cap and
complete
trade.
distributional thing, which might be fine. Again, what we learned from the Edgeworth box is that we will get to the efficient solution even if we do a redistribution. So that's fine, but wholeheartedly, if you believe in what we're doing here, there are gains from trade and we should do it. And then if we can figure out how to compensate the losers, that's fine. If we feel that that's important to compensate the losers, then we should compensate them. Or we say that they're in the business, and when you get into business, you know that there's going to be potential competition, you know that there's going to be potential law changes, it's part of what you bought into. We're not protecting you. This is the new world. Find something else to do if you don't have a comparative advantage in the production of liquor sales. It's life. I don't know. It's hard.
So you don't think that increase like in availability would increase like at least in the beginning an increased number of like in
I
my
think-
opinion.
I don't think so, because like in Ottawa, you're just having an extra spot to go, right? I mean, you can go. We've got what, 3 liquor stores?
Yeah, like
Blue Sky, the one up north, and then
Guys and Brandywine.
and Brandywine, yeah. And you can buy 3-2 at Walmart right now, or I think it's reduced. I mean, they do have beer and wine, but it's a lower alcohol content is Kansas law. That's the way Minnesota was
If
too.
you ever walk around Walmart, you don't very typically see anybody with beer.
No, not too often. I'd agree with you. You don't tend to go in there. So
I think it would just be more convenient.
yeah, it is more
Like,
convenient.
so I think that it would.
I think the benefits to the consumers are huge. If we aggregated the benefits for us not to have a pain in the butt, I mean, if we really surveyed all 13,000 residents of
It's like, I'm
Ottawa
gonna go get
and said, how much more happier are you going to make, right? And this is part of what economists do. We try to estimate what that consumer surplus is if we allow there to be a little more availability, a little more convenience. I suspect it far outweighs.
I could get ham and cheese stuff for my sandwiches and get a handle of Jack while I'm at Walmart.
Well, there
I
you
was
go.
gonna say, if I can get my protein and my gin and my wine at the same place, I'm gonna be ecstatic.
All right,
And
so
I think that, like, when you were saying, like, you don't really see very many people walking around with beer in Walmart, I think it's just because the alcohol level is lower than it
Right.
would be in a liquor store.
if you
So
want,
they just, like,
I think you're right.
they're like, if
yeah.
I'm going to spend money, unless we're just going for, like, the cheapest.
0.2 difference
In
that.
fact, I thought they were.
Huge.
I thought the legislation was allowing them to sell full
Yeah,
tilt
yeah,
stuff.
that is.
That's part of it too, isn't
Yeah.
it? I don't know if it's on the table to bring hard liquor into Walmarts too, but
Yeah, it's
I mean that in Missouri you can too, right?
Yeah,
I mean in
It's
Iowa
gas
too.
stations and everything.
Yeah, you can go.
All those.
Missouri, they're not
But
afraid
you
of
know,
the
prices
drinking.
are probably higher at the gas stations, a lot higher with that.
Actually,
They
it's
were.
a lot cheaper in Missouri.
Well,
Did you
in
guys know
Missouri, gas
Ottawa?
stations
Well,
versus-
Adam, you might know this. Who else is local? You're the only local Cadences, but she's Franklin County. I didn't realize the history of this place being dry.
Yeah.
So Franklin County was dry
These guys have-
just back to the what was it, late '90s or something?
I don't know.
Yeah, it was back to the late '90s. I mean, this place was a dry county
It's been
for
there
a long
15
time.
years because
So it was a big deal when they even allowed alcohol to be sold here.
Nobody sells liquor or anything on Sundays in Ottawa, but Franklin County, it's not illegal, I don't think, to
That's right. Ottawa maintained the no sales on Sunday.
That's not how it
But you go drunk, I think the nearest place is Pomona.
Yeah, Princeton and
Yeah.
stuff like
There was
that. Lawrence does.
Yes, I saw it on Facebook. There was like a survey done for like the best drinking states, and Missouri was actually ranked #1 just because you can buy it like all week long and anywhere. And
All the time, anywhere.
In Nebraska,
Nevada was like 2, and I don't remember. who else.
Nebraska you can buy on Sundays.
All right, so
Good talk.
axiom 4. Good talk. Good talk. Anytime we can sneak a little good real world talk. I'm all
So
up for
Russ,
that.
what's your wife putting in that chili?
All right, so production is subject to economies of scale. I don't know how many times I've tried to hit you in different ways. I'd like you to know this off the top of your head. So, what's economies of scale?
Left side is one and the right side.
Left side is 1, right side is 1. No, you're not articulating it good anyway.
That's all I remember.
But there is kind of the right side thing. If you're looking at
the
graphs.
average total cost, the more you can produce, really. Well,
You're saying it backwards, but you're on the right thing. Average total cost is the key. So if we
You
can...
have to have it, it's like the minimization of average total cost across all production.
No, it's not so much minimizing it, but it's dealing with this. You kind of said the thing, but you kind of said it backward, Michael. What's that?
Maximizing production for the
lowers average total cost.
Not so much maximizing it, but as you increase it.
As you
So
increase it,
using the word maximum,
cost.
yeah. So as you increase the scale of production, as you make more, the average total cost falls. And so we have that U-shaped average total cost curve. So it really deals with long run average cost. So we're thinking about the ability to change all resources, right? We're not doing a short run thing where we have capital fixed and then we're adding variable resources. So in the long run, if you're able to increase the scale of production and reduce your costs, you're taking advantage of economies of scale. What causes you to be able to do that?
Technology.
Okay, technology can alter it, but that's not one of the
Fixed
things
costs.
necessarily underlying the fixed costs, right? So again, if we have the ability to change our fixed cost, they're not really fixed. In the long run, all costs are variable. But I like how your textbook did this. I've never described it this way. But there's certain inputs that can be chunky. They literally call them
Lumpy.
chunky. Lumpy. Was it lumpy? Lumpy or chunky?
Invisible inputs.
All right. So what that means is that if you want to open up a new plant, you might have to bite the bullet on some things that have to come in a big size. And whether you produce 1 unit or 1,000 units, it still costs the same. So it does relate to fixed costs, but if we strip out the idea of there being fixed costs because we're thinking in the long run, then you got to go back to this lumpiness concept where I'm going to bite the bullet and do this big purchase, and the more I make, the lower my costs are. And so we see economies of scale when there's large upfront costs associated with it. All right. And that's through this indivisible inputs. That's what that means. You have to buy them, and you've got to buy factories in large chunks. You can't just buy the optimal amount each time. You kind of got to bite the bullet on that expensive machine or that expensive building or a combination of that. The other contributing factor, factor specialization, allows you to maybe continually grow as you become bigger. Instead of having one person doing 5 jobs, we can have one person doing 1 job or one person doing 2 jobs. And so as they become maybe more specialized in what they do, then they can become more efficient. So that's another way as your company gets bigger, and it allows you to, instead of one guy, well, you do the advertising this month, you're good at it, and then go run the factory line too and do this and do that, being the jack of all trades. As your company gets bigger, you're like, oh, you know what, we're doing enough business to where we could hire a marketing guy, and then that person will just take care of that and specialize in it. All right, and the last comment here is that how much economies of scale you have can go all over the place. I mean, there might not exist at all, or might be in some places. So the point is, bigger is not always better. Bigger is not always better. It depends on the situation. Bigger might be better, but it depends on the circumstances that you have. All right, number 5, competition generates zero economic profit. What is that, and why do we expect that to happen?
Because there's like the entry and exit.
Okay, good. That's the word I was looking for, the entry. So, or exit for that matter, but the flow of people in and out. So it doesn't make quite as much sense if we think about competition. Okay, there's 5 firms in this market, and they're earning big bucks. So they're competing with each other, but is there enough to drive profits down to zero? As long as there's free entry and exit, and more competitors can come to the table and are free to enter and exit, then profits are expected to be squeezed down to whatever the fair rate of return is for the resources that are employed in that activity. This middle bullet gives us a little reminder on what economic profit is. Maybe I should have asked that. So we've got all those explicit accounting costs, but then the cost of your time, the cost of what you could be doing if you weren't doing what you did. So the true opportunity cost is included in your total cost figure. Okay, questions or comments on that? So again, other than the clustering one, these are all pretty much things that we learned in principles class. These are the big takeaways from principles of microeconomics. Leave it up there if you're still jotting down.
Thanks.
What's that?
On Tuesday, are we going to be in chapter 2?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
Yeah. We might even get into chapter 2 right now here, actually. All right. Not sure. Yeah, that's it on that.
You're out of class early, right?
Nope. No, we're early today.
I think the earliest we ever got was like 3 minutes.
We're getting close to the end.
Did you take them and then modify them for?
What's that? Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, we get a stock set. Like you guys have access to these PowerPoints too. The stock set. So I just take these and put a little Rust flare on them. That's what I like to
That's
say.
what those boxes are.
To rust them up. Yeah, that's what the boxes are. So yeah, you won't have. And you guys do have. I think there's access to the PowerPoints through that website that's in the front. So anyway, I'll provide them to you though too. So this starts off looking at an economic model of why cities develop. And we're going to get into some stuff that's familiar territory at first. This isn't so familiar. Just to think about home production. Other than Tom and Jen on the island, if we go back to our castaway example where we got coconuts and fish, right? So this is what they're calling the backyard production model. And for starters, we're going to look at some very restrictive assumptions. So like any good economic model, there's got to have some assumptions, and hopefully we'll relax them to get better insights into reality. So here's the starting assumptions. No differences in productivity for labor and land. What does that mean? What does it mean to be productive, or what would no differences in productivity for labor or land mean? What does it mean to be productive, I guess, is one way to start it off.
Looking at just the resource
Output per unit of input.
Good. Output per unit of input. Nice. Yeah. So how much stuff can you make? How productive are you? So we're not dealing with dollars at this point. We're just dealing with your actual productivity on how many units of output per unit of input.
Did I earn my point there?
Yeah, you might have actually. I'll buy that. Oops, not +1. You're back to 0. You're back to even. Okay. I don't remember this one. The long run one, possibly. There's a relationship to costs, but it's not directly related to costs, but it can. Returns to scale. It is a long run concept. Returns to scale. What was economies of scale? Let's start there. Who remembers that from 3 seconds ago? Average cost decreases as quantity increases, or the scale of production increases. So now we've got constant returns to scale.
So for however big
It's
you
not
can-
decreasing or
yeah.
increasing, because there are two other cases. Increasing returns to scale and decreasing returns to scale, if that jogs any of your memories.
So no matter what, it's always going to remain constant, however big or little.
No matter what. Well, okay, how big or little. Okay? So this one dealt with the inputs and outputs,
Yeah.
kind of tying back to productivity.
So another unit of labor or capital is going to put out the same number or increase it by a constant amount.
The quantity of shirts.
The difference, so John, what's John saying is not right, so which is important, because if you increase a unit of, you're making an important point though. So, and it's just a definitional thing, so I wouldn't expect it to be right. But as you increase a unit of labor, and you look at what Katie was talking about, your productivity, what have we generally implicitly done, even if we didn't say it?
Increased output.
We increased output. Costs would have went up too. But if we're thinking more about just the physical amounts here, if I increase a unit of
You increase
labor,
quantity.
what else is being held constant? Quantity goes up.
Capital.
The capital, right. So when we look at the marginal product of labor or the marginal product of capital, in the production process, there's multiple inputs. And as we evaluate the incremental change in labor, we're holding the level of capital constant. That's what gives us that law of diminishing marginal product, which is a short-run concept, because in the short run, the amount of capital is fixed. That's our grill top. As I add more and more labor, the amount of additional output goes down, the law of diminishing marginal product.
That's like with the grill and the...
That was the grill and the hamburgers. So as I add more and more labor to a fixed grill top, the amount of output eventually diminishes. Now, the law of diminishing marginal product is a short-run concept. This is a long-run concept. So instead of just varying labor or capital, we're allowed to vary them all. And so if I double my inputs, all of my resources, I used to have 100, now I got 200. That 100 used to make 1,000 units of output. Now I'm doing 200 units of input. How much output do I get? 2,000. Doubling the inputs leads to double output, right? That's constant returns to scale. So there are no advantages to production when we have constant returns to scale. Now we're adding kind of a weird one that we'll come back to, but constant returns to scale in exchange, that there's no advantages to specialization. We're kind of ruling out specialization of trading things around.
What's the little? I guess it says in some exchange has cost without any benefits.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly?
Well, let's just go to this one. Yep. So these are the implications of that. we're not going to have trade. When we did our trade models, which we're going to do another one, we have to have differences in productivity. Two countries won't trade with each other if they're identical to each other. If you have country A, if the United States and Mexico are identical in every respect, there's not going to be any trade. There's nothing to squeeze out any advantage. There's no advantage if we have two identical parties. So by making them equally productive, we've actually ruled out the possibility of trade. And we have their resource base the same as well. So there is no reason to exchange. There's no benefit. There's no cities. So what we've done is we've created a really restrictive model to say there's not going to be cities happening if this is the way the world looks. But of course we all know the world doesn't really look that way. So this is our first baby step in trying to think about how cities develop. And this last bullet, I guess I should point out, uniform price of land and population density. So we just have everything kind of stay the same. We'd have all those axioms into place, and everything would just be all homogeneous everywhere. Life would be really boring.
So basically, we just created a thing of this is how cities won't happen. So because
That's right.
cities do happen, this is how cities happen.
That's right. So now we're going to come back and say how they do happen. So let's drop the assumption of equal productivity. If we allow one group, if we want to call it a country, if we want to call it a city or one place, a different household, whatever it is, if we allow one to be more productive than the other, what does it generate? I don't think I said the word yet. We've danced around the issue. It's back to kind of the heart of trade, comparative advantage. So we've got comparative advantage being generated from differences in productivity. Okay, so if you're looking in your book, maybe don't look in your book now to kind of work through this without seeing the answer. Let's say that our, I don't know if you saw it already, but
I won't say
all right, so you can keep quiet. So some of this, it's good to kind of push yourself without seeing the answer. I'll try to warn you if I remember where I have this stuff, because I don't mind you guys following along in your book if you want. So we've got the north and the south. Here's our output per hour. 2 bread, 6 shirts. 1 bread, 1 shirt for the south. So in 1 hour of work, that's where our productivity thing is, right? In 1 hour of work, we've got a bread, we've got a shirt, 2 bread, 6 shirts. What is the opportunity cost in the north for a bread? What does the north have? 3? Everybody seeing that? Now I still like to pull out my equation goggles that I think I showed you a long time ago. So in the north, 2 bread can be traded for 6 shirts, right? I can have 2 bread or I can have 6 shirts. I'm not interested in 2 bread, I want 1 bread. Divide by 2, divide by 2. 1 bread equals 3 shirts. Or the opportunity cost of a shirt is 1/3. Right? So we're just going to flip it around as kind of the easy way to remember, but it might be good to kind of try to do it in reverse in your head. How about it for the south? Opportunity cost of a bread, 1. Opportunity cost of shirt, 1. So we got this 1-to-1 trade-off.
Russ.
What?
You saying that the north is, are the writers saying that the north is better than the south in this case?
The north, I don't know. What do you think?
This is going to be post-Civil War when the South is on fire.
Okay, got it.
So what do these numbers tell us?
That they have.
The north is more productive.
The north is what? And what is, Chelsea, busted.
It's okay to say it's
Trying to
really
put it that way.
Well, they've got a total advantage.
Is that your first time?
Or-
We're still wrapping up. We're still
No,
wrapping
I
up.
had
That's okay. what did we call that? There's another name for this advantage. We had comparative advantage, absolute advantage. So the North is better at producing both. You give the North a North person in an hour, they can do 2 bread. South can only do 1. You give the North an hour, they can do 6 shirts. South can only do 1. So they are more productive in both. They have an absolute advantage in production. The good news for the South is that that doesn't mean we're still not going to try to figure something out with them, because if we look at the comparative advantage, if we look at the opportunity cost, who's better at shirts in terms of not having to, in terms of what they have to give up?
South.
South?
Oh, wait, no.
North. Okay. And what about bread? South. So when we flip our brain around a little bit and think about the economics, the North has to give up 3 shirts. So that's pretty expensive. The South only has to give up 1 shirt. So in that respect, they're better in terms of what they have to give up. That's why we always hammer on opportunity costs. And so then where does the rest of the story go from here?
This North trades with the South.
North trades with the South. What do?
North makes all shirts and the South makes
Yep.
all bread.
So then we take the Adam Smith part, specialization. Do what you're best at and trade for the other good. And then we can start to calculate the gains from trading. All right, we'll pick up there on a different day. Tuesday, yeah. We're off Monday, actually. And hopefully I'll see most of you on Friday tomorrow at my house.
Russ, quick question.
If I show up late.